everybody. I'm here on Facebook Live tonight. This is our second in our series of divorce stories. And today the topic is parenting through divorce. And I actually think we're sort of getting used to this FB Live way of communicating. So bear with me if there's any glitches as we go along. Um, so I am a certified divorce coach. I come to divorce coaching after 20 years as a child and family psychotherapist. And, as you know, the statistics 50% of first marriages end in divorce. And I really wanted to help out my clients in the best way I possibly could. And I went back into the research and tried to find something, some people are getting on, something that would help me guide my family so that they could manage and navigate divorce in the best way possible. And what I found was that there actually wasn't much research out there. So I felt like I was kind of winging it with the families that I was working with. And then about 10 years ago, I went through my own high conflict divorce. And even as a trained professional who had experience working with GALs, who knew about the divorce process, I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. And for me, and I'll share a little bit about my personal story, is I felt so guilty about leaving the marriage. And so I hired this very nice gentleman for an attorney. I was like thinking we didn't have a lot of things to fight about. And my ex hired sort of what we call a bulldog attorney. And she helped him, I guess, by making tons of accusations about my parenting as we were going through the divorce process. And I responded with emotional reactivity and hypervigilance, and I made a lot of not so great decisions, just decisions that really ended up costing me a ton of money, because at the end of the day, they were all things that the attorneys did not care about. It had no bearing whatsoever on our legal divorce, no bearing whatsoever on our parenting plan, none of it. And I wish I knew that kind of going in. And so that is a tactic that a lot of attorneys do use, and it's something to kind of be aware of. So, I even remember going through my divorce and asking my attorney, I'm like, because my daughter was young, she was 2, and just asking and saying, what is a recommended visitation plan for a 2-year-old? And, he kept telling me, oh, I think there's guidelines, but I have to find them. I'm not even sure where the book is that has the answers for that. Because at the end of the day, the parents have to kind of figure it out. And again, I was sort of hung up on wanting to do things the right way for my daughter. So I do have a bunch of questions today, and I could talk on and on and on and on and on and on about this topic because I have a lot of experience in it. But what I'm realizing is that there's so many different areas of parenting through divorce. And so what I'm going to plan to do is try to keep this to about a half hour, because I know you guys have other things to do. And I'm going to answer as many questions as I can, but probably what I'll do at some point is come back and talk again about parenting through divorce. So I want to make sure I, address everybody's questions and stories as they send them to me. So thank you so much, the people that are sharing. It helps so much. So I'm going to go through some of the questions and just very informally answer them the best I can. Please feel free to chime in if you have your own questions. If you want to share your reactions, just let me know. So here's question number 1. I have my first overnight visit night scheduled for my 3 and 5-year-old to go to my husband's. I am terrified and I don't know how to handle this. So this is a really common, and though I'm saying husband and wife, I'm reading the questions as is. It can be opposite too. It's not just about husbands and wives. But I know for moms in particular, and this is something that the court systems really don't address or talk about, there is a little bit of, I call it a little bit of that mama bear instinct that can come up. And it also, if you're divorcing somebody and there's some trust issues to start with, and you're having that first overnight, particularly if your child is young, that mama bear comes up. It comes flaming up and it produces a lot of anxiety. And so, how do you get through it? So I always tell people, have a plan. For a lot of people, it's the first time that they're actually spending time alone and they're not parenting, and that in and of itself is scary. So have a plan for activities, have friend supports in place. There's actually a really great show out there called Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce, and they have a whole episode on her first night alone, and she ends up drinking too much wine, and her friends end up coming over last minute to save her, and she's embarrassed that it was so hard to get through that first overnight. But it is, particularly when your children are younger. So just have your support system in place. People are responding. Have a plan, have activities, keep yourself busy, and just know it gets so much easier as time goes on. I promise you. It gets easier as it goes. So that is question number 1. Okay. Are you guys with me? Are we good? So I always get this question. This is the most common question, and I'm going to talk a lot about it because there's a lot of information in it. But how do I tell my children that we are getting divorced? And afterwards, how do I know if they're okay? I would say across the board, that's everybody's first concern and question, which it should be, is are my children going to be okay getting through this divorce? So there's, and I actually wrote down some notes here because I wanted to make sure I gave you the right information. So I have some written guidelines that I tell people when they are going to sit down and talk to their children and let them know that a divorce is coming. I really greatly encourage parents to have this conversation with all of the children together. Okay. It's when one sibling knows and the other sibling doesn't know. And sometimes parents do that with very well meaning because they want to tell the older sibling first. It just creates a lot of pressure for that sibling who holds the information and can't share it with their other. So I really encourage to do it all together. Gear the conversation to the age development, to the youngest child, okay? And what you're doing is you're sharing factual information. So have a script. Sit down with your soon-to-be ex and write out a script so you know what you're going to present. You want to make it as non-emotional as possible, because if you're not able to do it without falling apart yourself and crying, your kids see that, and it actually can scare them very much. They're going to take their cues from you, and if they see that you're able to manage this and be okay, the better they're going to be. I tell people this, and actually I'm going to give you an example of a case that I worked with recently. A lot of parents also use this frequently, as they'll say, Mommy and Daddy love you, and we love each other, but we fell out of love. Please don't tell your children this. Kids do not understand that. What they hear is Mom and Dad don't love each other anymore, and then their next fear becomes, does that mean Mom and Dad can fall out of love with me? So when I work with parents and I coach them, I say, you know what, we love you guys, right? And we're always going to be a family, but we're not going to mention the love that's happening between Mom and Dad. We're going to use words like Mom and Dad are having a hard time working together as a team, right? Mom and Dad are having a hard time communicating. We're having a hard time problem solving. We are having a hard time growing together, right? And assuring the child that it's about the adults, not about them. Kids, which is awesome thing about kids, they kind of think the world revolves around them, right? Do you ever remember feeling that way? It's kind of good. But the problem with that is then you also think that what happens around you is something that you created. So your children need to hear, and by the way, not just in this one time you sit down and tell them you're getting a divorce, but over and over and over again, they need to hear that it's not their fault. Okay, this was an adult decision. It had nothing to do with them. I worked with one sibling family, and for years, one of the siblings blamed the other one. Move on. I encourage people to have that conversation 2 to 3 weeks prior to anybody moving out, prior to separation, and telling that we are still a family. We're just a different family. Normalize your children's feelings. Tell them you have a right to feel angry, to feel scared, to feel confused, to feel sad, and we can manage all those feelings. Like, please talk to us about them. Ask us if you have any questions. We're here to talk about it as much as you need us to. Often they need to hear permission to love the other parent, right? From each of the parents, because that frees them up. And just be prepared for future discussions. Adults, when we're grieving, typically, although it's not always as clean, but typically, if we have a loss, we're sad, and we go through all the stages of grief, and we get ourselves and build ourselves up to being stronger again. kids grieve a little bit differently, partially because they're so busy being kids. They might sit at that meeting and have absolutely no reaction, which is actually one of the questions that somebody sent to me. That doesn't mean they're not grieving. It might mean that it pops up on Christmas Day. It might mean it pops up 2 weeks down the road. It might mean it pops up the first time they have to actually pack their clothes to visit the parent who's not living in the home anymore. So kids, it's almost like up and down. So if kids are never, ever, ever, ever grieving, that's probably, hi, Heather, not a good sign either, because you don't want them to keep it all inside. But you will see that kids kind of go up and down through this, much different than how adults do it. Let's see, did I get everything right? So I think that's it for that, as far as how to tell the children. And then, okay, so what do you look for, right? So after you've told the children and it's out, you look for what's going to happen. Most kids are going to start testing limits. That's a very common thing, partially because they want to make sure that mom and dad are still going to be mom and dad, right? So if I know that mom gets really mad if I don't bring the dirty dishes in, I might end up leaving my dirty dishes out unconsciously for 9 or 10 times after I hear about the divorce, because when mom does set the limit with me and gets mad at me, it assures me that mom is still being mom. Okay, so kids will expect a little bit of testing. You want to watch for regression. Sometimes children are toilet trained and they're wetting the bed suddenly. So those are things to be concerned about. You might see some signs of separation anxiety. I hear a lot about, I had one dad tell me, I'm in the kitchen, I'm cooking dinner, and my son's in the living room about 10 feet away, and he's going, Dad, 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 Dad. And he has to keep reassuring him that he's there. So, those are kind of basic, normal reactions. Research shows that a year post-divorce, if everything goes well, if the co-parents, parenting is going well, there's no conflict that's visible to the child that they know of, a year post-divorce, kids are actually functioning much better. So expect some bumps and bruises after the initial discussion. Expect the discussion to keep going, probably for a year. You have to be available for questions and talking. And knowing that, if this continues, this behavior is bad, if transitions are really, really, really awful, you have children that are absolutely refusing to go visit the other parent, that's the time to bring in the therapist, okay? Some schools actually do have divorce support groups, I know here in Andover, and that helps the kids as well to just kind of hear that they're not alone and that there are other divorced families out there. So the other thing I tell people is to be aware of the fantasy. Lots of families are and again, this really comes from a great intention, but they're doing things like, well, like every Friday night, we're all going to go out to dinner, right? Mom, dad, and the kids, we're all going to go every Friday because that's what we used to do when we were married. So be aware of the fact that children, and I'm talking even teenage children, have a fantasy on some level of mom and dad getting back together. So in the initial stages post, right after the divorce, and I'd say probably for 6 months to a year afterwards, kids kind of hold on to those things. So although, it's sort of this new way of being divorced and I totally get why people doing it, you have to be careful that you're not sending mixed messages to your kids, right? Because sometimes, though, it's just dinner every Friday together. For some kids, that might be feeding into the fantasy of mom and dad are going to get back together. So it's just something to think about. So I remember I said in my initial post, how do you make sure your kids are okay? Well, number one, avoiding conflict. Please don't use your children as messengers. Please don't pepper your children. When they come back from moms or dads, don't start bombarding them with 20, 30, 40 questions. And a lot of times, a lot of parents, and again, not knowing that they're doing this, is they're asking very leading questions to the children, and the kids get it, right? So if, kids come back to mom's house and mom keeps repeatedly asking, so what did dad's girlfriend cook you? What did dad's girlfriend cook you? What did she make you? Was it good? Was it better than mine? Was it this? Was it that? The kids understand where they might not clearly understand, but they get that that's a problem for their mom, right? And they might start feeling like they need to answer in order to support their mother, right? Or feeling torn and not sure how to feel. So please be careful of questions. Limit conversations when, when kids are at, I know for me, when my daughter's at my dad's, I maybe call once every 2 days, because what I found for her is it was just harder when I called. It just reminded her that, she misses mom, and maybe she wanted to see her friends in her neighborhood. So, not that there should not be conversations, or absolutely should be, but it shouldn't be all throughout the day. It shouldn't be sporadic. If you have like a structured check in every night before bed, that's a little bit better than 3, 4, 5, 10, 20. You wouldn't believe how many phone calls I hear going on. There's just really no need for that. So again, parents act, this is a business relationship. There really isn't much need for moms and dads to be talking a whole ton. That's the other thing. When's pick up, when's drop up? Use a Google Calendar, right? This is a business relationship. Um, let's see. And again, it's like giving each parent the freedom also to have their own rules in each house. I have worked with families who are 10, 20, I mean, I can't even tell you, years and years post divorce, and they are still butting heads and arguing because there's different rules at mom's house than there are at dad's house. And that is just a setup for continuing conflict. It's a setup for continuing discussion. It's a setup for continuing contact between the parents and arguments. You have to be able to let that go. Of course, you make sure your children are safe. That's a given. Okay. But if dad, maybe lets them have an extra ice cream on Friday, or, mom lets the kids stay up till 10 on Saturday, let it go. Okay. Sometimes the goal is parallel parenting, meaning I manage this at my house, you manage this at your house, and we're going to respect that each of us are doing the best we can and treating our children with kindness and making sure they're safe and well fed. It does not have to be the same rules at each house. Okay. I'm letting you know that. You have permission for that. So I'm getting some reactions, which are awesome. Okay, so I've been talking on and on and on. I want to get to a few more of these questions before we're done. Okay. So somebody writes in and says, my ex wants 50-50 child plan. I think he's doing this just to get out of paying child support. Does this even work? So in my opinion, so this is sort of the new thing, because the legal system really wants to keep moms and dads involved, which is awesome. That's actually a really good thing. It comes from a good place. 50-50 is really, really, really tough to do unless the parents live in the same town and unless there is a more kind of amicable relationship. And I will say, some of the families that I work with, some of the times what I do is I coach them on kind of a step program with visitation, particularly if you have a younger child, because younger children sometimes don't do very well with the 50-50. They really need to be in one place a large majority of the time, because they need more consistency and can't really manage the transitions back and forth. So part of it is also knowing the child, which is something that I also do. I'll work with the kids and provide an assessment. And then I tell the parents just my recommendation, but the parents do with what my recommendation. I'm not a legal person. They can take it to their mediator. They can take it to a parent coordinator. They can talk to their attorneys about it. The other thing that I will say happens a lot with 50-50. So by the way, they are changing the child support guidelines, where time isn't going to be as big of a factor as it has been. But the other thing I caution people about is, I had a case recently where the dad agreed to 50-50. He's traveling 3 weeks out of the month. The child's going to be in basically childcare that the parents are both going to have to pay for. The mom's home, the mom's available. And so then it just doesn't make sense, right? Because the mom really actually is doing all the work. And again, when I say moms, I'm not saying this to be sexist in any way, shape, or form. But I worked with that couple to be like, hey, listen, like, what's going to work for your kids? I think your kid's sitting in childcare, so you can maybe lower your child support by $100, $200 a month, but you're paying it out the other end for a babysitter or a nanny, and you're traveling, you're not actually seeing your children. 50-50 is not going to work. So let's think of something that does work. Okay. It doesn't have to be 50-50. I think what's happening now is people go in, the lawyers say, let's just do 50-50. They can avoid fighting. Mom and dad are involved. Everything's great. It's not that simple. Okay. So you have to make some good decisions for yourself. This is a very, very, very good question. As I told you, I specialize in high conflict divorce. I've been through my own. Does the court take into account that my ex is a narcissist and just lets the kids play video games all day long? And I'm laughing because I tell people this all the time, so I'm going to swear. If I upset you, I'm sorry. The courts do not care about whether or not your ex is a difficult personality. They don't. They simply don't care. They want your children to be involved both with mom and both with dad, no matter how frustrating your ex is, no matter how awful you think their parenting is. If it's not an abuse situation, if it's not an alcohol or drug abuse situation, a neglect situation, they don't care. Okay. So you still, no matter how narcissistic your ex is, have to figure out a plan that works and that works for your children as well. Okay. And that can be some really tough work. I'm doing a lot of coaching with people around that. So let me see. I have so many questions and I want to get to all of them. Okay, here's a good one. Does my soon-to-be ex have the right to ask for visitation with my daughter who is not his biological daughter? So this really, this is a very good question. The problem is there's a lot of information I don't know from this question. It really depends on the relationship between your daughter and your boyfriend. Because if he actually was the dad role, I don't know if she called him dad, I don't know if he filled in, he possibly does have some rights. He can actually file a petition with the court and explain his history of being a caregiver for the child, and then actually might have some rights. So typically I'd want to say no, but that's not always the case. It really depends on the situation. I'd probably need more information to give you a good answer on that. So feel free to, again, send me another message. Okay. You guys still with me? Are there people there? Yay, I have some people listening. So the other question is, can I ask on my agreement for my ex to never bring a significant other around? Oh boy, I'm going to take a deep breath on that one. We're going to take a deep breath together. So that's actually one of the mistakes that people make in divorce that we call wanting guarantees and certainties. Here's the thing that people always forget. When you are doing your divorce agreement, it's sort of based on a snapshot in time, and this is part of the challenge of it. Life continues to move on, and it's going to move on for your soon-to-be ex. It's also going to move on for you, okay? So you have to be careful, because if you put something in the agreement that says something like that, and then maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years go by, and you meet this wonderful person, but you have this agreement for your ex never to bring their significant other, it's just something to think about, okay? Because although all of us like to pretend we know the future, we don't know. And your life could actually be like super kick-ass post-divorce. And so when you're gonna sign off and dig your heels in with these guarantees, the attorneys may or may not let you put it in the agreement. But remember, is this something that you really want to enforce? Because you also need to enforce it for yourself as well, okay? And people do date. We also are going to have FB Lives about dating, by the way. We have a dating coach on our team, and we want to get you out there. We want to get you out there feeling confident and having fun. So, all right. So let's see. Seeing if there's anybody who's chimed in with any questions. People are saying, thank you, Bradley. Yay. Let me see. Yeah, so the same thing. My ex has very different rules than mine. Why won't he just listen to me? Like I said before, sometimes the best thing is parallel parenting. It's just respecting each other and each other having different rules within reason, right? If it's not a safety issue. I did want to mention there is an app that actually came out. There's a couple apps that you guys should know about. But there's one called talkingparents.com, and it is free. Both parents have to agree to do it. But it actually keeps track of phone calls, texts, emails, everything. And if you actually need a documented report on all of that, I think you pay like $24 and they send you a binded report. It's a great way to communicate. It's a great way to keep track of everything. I know I hear stories like I send my ex a text and she doesn't respond for 8 hours. So talkingparents.com would actually monitor that and know that. There's another app called Our Family Wizard, which is a great app for families that are in conflict around parenting. That one does cost money. And that one's a little bit more sophisticated, and attorneys tend to recommend it. They like it. What it actually does is it cleans up language too, right? So if you're sending something that could potentially be read as negative or critical or anything, it will actually send the message back to you and ask you to rewrite it. So that's a little bit more of an intensive app, but that's also there as well. I always tell parents to use Google Calendar. Do your scheduling right on the calendar so that you have everything documented, and if somebody changes the schedule, you have it right there. Okay, so use technology. I'm just learning to use technology, but use it to your advantage because it's a wonderful thing. Texting, a lot of parents I work with, I'm like, just do texting in 10 words or less. And that's going to reduce the conflict, and it's going to help you guys out. And when I give them those limits and that structure, it actually does really reduce the conflict. And that's the whole goal, right? So remember, I'm going to go back to kids do great a year post-divorce when there is no conflict, right? So that is what we want to do. And by the way, biting your tongue is a really great skill that I coach people at, but it's going to help your children in the long run. So I guess, here's another one. I'm so angry and I can't help but let this show to my children. I feel like my therapist is asking me to lie. So that's a little bit like what we're talking about. Nobody's asking you to lie. And here's the thing. I always tell people this. It's called taking the higher road. It's called taking care of your children. It's not easy. And I'm going to tell you this because I tell every parent I work with, at the end of the day, when your children get older, they always figure things out. Okay? Have a little faith in that. Realize that the only thing you can control is your relationship with your child. You can't control your ex's relationship with the child. So if your ex is making really bad decisions and not doing great, thank you, as a parent, that's on him or her. It's not your job to save them, right? Because just like any relationship, you get what you put into it. So you're just going to hone in, you're going to focus on your relationship with your kids, and that's it, because that's all you can control, and you're going to make sure that relationship is great. So part of not showing the anger, by the way, is self-care, and we're also going to talk more about that. Have a friend that you can vent to. Go to the gym. In my free time, people know that I actually teach Strong by Zumba, and every time I start a class, I say, just imagine punching out someone that really pissed you off this week. Maybe that's your ex, but that's like a great way to get out your anger and aggression and not spill in front of your children. Okay, it's just not easy, not helpful. But with a great support network, with a great team behind you, and the time to slow down and meditate and think of intentions, think about how you want to live your life. Okay, your kids are probably, think about, what do I want my kids telling their therapist when they go to therapy next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What kind of patterns of relationships do you want your children to have? Because right now you're modeling for them. Do you want them to go on and have healthy relationships and be less likely to get a divorce? Well, show them the higher road. Show them how to do that. Okay. So that's my little push for you guys. And I know it's not easy. It's totally easier said than done. And that's why a coach is so awesome. I really wish I had a coach when I was going through my divorce. I was actually just talking with a colleague this morning. We did a little video up in Newburyport. When you don't know what you're doing, when you're feeling hyper vigilant, when you're afraid, when you're scared that you're going to lose time with your children, you react from what I call the lizard brain, right? It's the part of your brain that's that fight or flight mode. And then you're not making good rational decisions for yourself in the divorce process, because the divorce process, as we were saying last week, it's a business process. Okay. That's where a coach comes in. I'm going to help you. You can vent to me. You can tell me how awful your ex is. I'm going to sit here and listen, and then I'm going to help you contain it in a way that you can start making some good decisions for yourself now and for the future. So that's about it. I want to wish everybody a happy 4th of July. We have fireworks here tomorrow. I hope you're enjoying the summer. And if you guys have any questions at all, I don't care what time of day or night, just send them to me. Keep sending your stories. And like I said, we'll probably do a part 2 of parenting through divorce. It's just such a big topic and there's so much to cover. I hope I gave you guys some good information today. Always looking for feedback. So let me know. All right, have a great holiday. Hello, everybody who tuned in. Thank you so much. And I will see you later. We'll see you next week on FB Live. Bye bye.